The wagon rolled into Lusk, Wyoming on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, and Beatrice Walsh knew immediately that this dusty frontier town would test every ounce of strength she possessed. She sat in the back of the covered wagon, her fingers gripping the wooden seat so tightly, her knuckles had turned white, watching through the canvas opening as the town's main street came into view. Her brother Samuel drove the team of horses, his shoulders tense with the weight of responsibility that had fallen on him since their parents died of fever 6 months ago. Beatrice wanted to tell him it would be all right, that they would make a fresh start here in this wild territory, but the words caught in her throat the way they always did. The accident had happened when she was 14 years old. A fall from a horse had left her with injuries that healed on the outside but damaged something inside her throat, something the doctors back in Ohio could never quite fix. She could make sounds, could whisper sometimes when she pushed hard enough, but full speech eluded her grasp like water slipping through her fingers. At 20 years old now, she had learned to communicate through gestures, through writing on her small slate board, and through her expressions. Her eyes had become her voice, and those who loved her understood perfectly well what she meant to say. But strangers rarely had that patience. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store, and Beatrice climbed down carefully, smoothing her dusty blue dress. The street was crowded with afternoon activity, miners and ranchers and townspeople going about their business. She could feel eyes on her immediately, the way newcomers always drew attention in small frontier towns. "Stay close," Samuel said quietly. "I will see about lodging and supplies." Beatrice nodded, following him into the general store. The interior was dim and cool compared to the blazing heat outside, shelves stocked with everything from flour sacks to mining equipment. A portly man stood behind the counter, spectacles perched on his nose, and 2 women browsed the fabric selection near the window. "Help you?" the shopkeeper asked, eyeing them with cautious curiosity. "We are looking to settle here," Samuel said. "Need supplies and information about available land or work." The shopkeeper nodded slowly. "Name is Porter. There is some land available north of town, though it is rough country. What is your trade?" "I can work with my hands, anything needed. My sister and I lost our parents and are looking for a fresh start." The 2 women had turned now, watching with undisguised interest. One of them, a thin woman with sharp features and an even sharper expression, looked Beatrice up and down with obvious judgment. "Your sister does not speak for herself?" the woman asked, her tone carrying an edge that made Beatrice's stomach tighten. "She cannot," Samuel said simply, his jaw setting, "but she understands everything and communicates just fine." "Cannot?" The woman exchanged a glance with her companion. "What kind of affliction is that?" Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from anger, but from the familiar shame that always accompanied these moments. She reached for her slate board, but the woman continued talking. "Seems a burden to drag all the way out here to the frontier. A woman who cannot even speak, how will she manage?" "Margaret, that is unkind," the other woman murmured, though her tone lacked conviction. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. "My sister is no burden. She is more capable than most." "Of course you would say that," Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. "But truly, what use is a woman who cannot speak, cannot call for help, cannot conduct business, cannot even greet neighbors properly?" Beatrice's eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. She had heard variations of these sentiments her entire adult life. Instead, she met Margaret's gaze directly, letting her expression show exactly what she thought of such small-minded cruelty. The bell above the door chimed, and a presence filled the doorway that made even Margaret fall silent. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the frame. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the entire entrance. His dark hair fell past his collar, sun-streaked and slightly wild, and his face was all hard angles and sharp features weathered by years of mountain living. His arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his worn shirt, were corded with muscle, and his hands looked strong enough to break stone. He wore buckskin pants and heavy boots, and a hunting knife hung from his belt. Everything about him spoke of raw, untamed strength, but it was his eyes that caught Beatrice's attention. They were a startling shade of gray-green, like a mountain lake, and they held an intelligence and depth that contradicted his rough exterior. Thompson, Porter said, straightening immediately. Did not expect to see you down from the mountain for another month. Needed salt and ammunition, the man said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Beatrice's chest. Those great green eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with obvious assessment. They lingered on Beatrice for a moment, and she felt as though he saw everything in that single glance. This young man and his sister just arrived, Porter said, gesturing to Samuel and Beatrice. Looking to settle here. Is that so? Thompson said, moving to the counter with surprising grace for someone so large. Up close, Beatrice could see the scars on his hands and forearms, marks from a life lived hard and dangerous. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and leather. His sister cannot speak, Margaret interjected, her voice carrying that same judgmental tone. Some kind of affliction. I was just saying, what a burden that must be, especially out here where a woman needs all her faculties. Thompson's gaze shifted to Margaret, and the woman actually took a step back. His expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had gone cold. You were saying that, he repeated slowly. Well, yes. It is only practical to point out that she can barely speak. How will she manage? How will she communicate when danger comes? A woman's voice is her protection, and without it, she says more with her eyes than you will with that mouth of yours in a lifetime, Thompson said, his voice cutting through Margaret's words like a blade through butter. The shop went absolutely silent. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. She stared at this mountain man, this stranger, who had just defended her more thoroughly than anyone except her family ever had. Thompson's gaze moved back to Beatrice, and this time when their eyes met she saw something that made her heart skip. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. He looked at her as though he truly saw her, not just the affliction or the limitation, but her. Communication is more than words, Thompson continued, still looking at Beatrice. Takes more intelligence to understand that than most people have. Margaret's face had gone red, and she grabbed her companion's arm. Well, I never. Come along, Susan. We do not need to stay here and be insulted. She swept toward the door, pausing only to add, You may be strong as an ox, Josiah Thompson, but your manners are as rough as your appearance. The door slammed behind them. Porter cleared his throat awkwardly. That was Margaret Harding. Her husband owns the bank. Might have been better not to antagonize her. Might have been better if she kept her opinions to herself, Thompson replied without concern. He turned to Samuel. What kind of work do you do? Anything needed, Samuel said, clearly still processing what had just happened. I am good with my hands, can learn quickly. Can you handle rough living? The land north of town is not easy. Winters are brutal, summers are dry, and the nearest neighbor might be miles away. We can handle it, Samuel said firmly. We need a fresh start. Thompson nodded, then his gaze returned to Beatrice. You got a name, miss? She felt her face grow warm under his direct attention. She pulled out her slateboard and wrote carefully, Beatrice Walsh. Thompson read it, and the corner of his mouth moved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Beatrice, that is a good name. I am Josiah Thompson. Live up in the mountains about 10 miles north of here. Trap and hunt mostly. Sell furs. Beatrice wrote again, Thank you for what you said. Was only the truth, Josiah said, reading the words upside down with ease. Plenty of people who talk constantly and say nothing worth hearing. Known a few who rarely speak and make every word count. He paused, his eyes meeting hers again. Figure you are the second kind, even without words. Something in Beatrice's chest expanded, warm and bright. This rough mountain man, this stranger who looked like he could wrestle bears and probably had saw her, really saw her. Porter cleared his throat again. Thompson, if you are heading back north, maybe you could show these two the available land up that way. You know the territory better than anyone. Josiah considered this, his gaze thoughtful. Could do that. When are you wanting to look? As soon as possible, Samuel said. We have some savings, enough to get started if the price is fair. Day after tomorrow, Josiah said. Meet me here at dawn. Bring water and wear practical clothes. The ride is rough. Samuel nodded gratefully. We will be here. Thank you. Josiah completed his business with Porter, gathering his supplies with efficient movements. Before he left, he looked at Beatrice one more time, and she felt that gaze like a physical touch. See you in 2 days, Miss Walsh, he said. Then he was gone, ducking through the doorway and into the bright afternoon sunlight. Beatrice touched her fingers to her throat, feeling her rapid pulse. In all her 20 years, no stranger had ever defended her like that. No one outside her family had ever suggested that her silence might be anything other than a limitation. "Well," Porter said, breaking the silence, "that is Josiah Thompson for you. Lives alone in the mountains, comes down maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Folks say he left civilization behind years ago after some tragedy, but no one knows for sure. He is a good man, though, honest and fair. Bit rough around the edges, but out here that is more virtue than vice." Samuel was looking at Beatrice with a knowing expression. "You all right?" She nodded, then wrote on her slate, "He was kind." "He was," Samuel agreed. "Come on, let us find somewhere to stay for the next couple days." They secured 2 rooms at the boarding house, a simple but clean establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and showed no judgment when Samuel explained about Beatrice's condition. That evening, sitting by the window of her small room, Beatrice found her thoughts returning again and again to Josiah Thompson. She tried to recall every detail. The way he had moved, all that strength carried with surprising grace. The way his voice had sounded, deep and certain when he defended her. The way his eyes had looked, seeing past her silence to something deeper. It had been a long time since Beatrice had let herself think about romance or love in Ohio. The young men of her acquaintance had treated her with either pity or dismissal. A woman who could not speak was not seen as a desirable wife, no matter what other qualities she might possess. After a while, she had stopped hoping, stopped imagining a future that included partnership and passion. But something about the way Josiah had looked at her had awakened those sleeping hopes. She shook her head, trying to be practical. He was a mountain man, a trapper who lived alone in rough country. He probably valued his solitude and had no interest in complications. And she was just passing through, someone he would help out of basic decency and then forget. Still, as she drifted off to sleep that night, it was his gray-green eyes she saw in her dreams. The next day passed slowly. Samuel met with various townspeople, learning about land prices and available opportunities. Beatrice stayed mostly at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Chen with tasks in exchange for their room and board. The older woman was kind and patient, and they developed an easy system of communication through gestures and Beatrice's slate board. That evening, Samuel returned with news. "The land Thompson is going to show us is rough but affordable. Porter says it has water access, which is crucial. If we like it, we might be able to buy it outright with our savings and have enough left over for supplies to get through winter." Beatrice wrote, "It sounds promising." "It does," Samuel agreed, "though I worry about the isolation. You would be miles from town, from other women." Beatrice considered this. The truth was, she had never quite fit in with other women her age. The constant need to explain herself, to work past the initial awkwardness of her silence, made friendships difficult. Part of her thought that isolation might be preferable to the constant judgment she faced in more populated areas. She wrote, "I would rather be alone than mocked." Samuel's expression grew pained. "What that woman said yesterday, what people have said over the years, it is not right. You are worth 10 of them." Beatrice squeezed his hand, grateful for his loyalty. Samuel had always been her fierce protector, from the time they were children. He was only 2 years older, 22 now, but he carried the weight of responsibility with determination. She wrote, "I know you believe that, I just wish more people did." "Thompson did," Samuel pointed out. "He saw it right away." Yes, Beatrice thought, he did. That night she took extra care preparing for the next day's journey. She braided her long brown hair tightly and dressed in her most practical clothes, a simple cotton dress in dark green that would not show dust too badly. She fell asleep early, wanting to be well rested. Dawn came cold and clear. Beatrice and Samuel arrived at the general store just as the sun was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Josiah was already there, waiting beside 3 horses. One was clearly his, a large gray gelding that looked strong enough to carry his considerable weight easily. The other 2 were smaller but sturdy-looking. "Morning," Josiah said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet air. He wore the same practical clothes as before, and his hair was tied back loosely at his neck. In the early light, Beatrice could see him more clearly. He was probably around 30 years old, his face showing the wear of outdoor living, but handsome in a rough, masculine way. His jaw was strong and shadowed with stubble, and his hands as he checked the saddles were scarred but capable. "Morning," Samuel responded. "These for us?" "Borrowed them from Porter. The ride is about 2 hours. You done much riding?" "Some. My sister rides well." Josiah's gaze moved to Beatrice, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Good. The terrain gets rough in places. Stay close and follow my lead." He helped her mount, his hands on her waist, lifting her easily into the saddle. The brief contact sent warmth through her entire body, and she had to focus hard on arranging her skirts and gathering the reins. They rode out of town, heading north, the rising sun at their backs. The land immediately surrounding Lusk was relatively flat, covered in prairie grass and sagebrush, but in the distance Beatrice could see the dark line of mountains rising against the sky. Josiah rode ahead, setting an easy pace that the horses could maintain for hours. Samuel rode beside Beatrice, both of them following the mountain man's broad back. For a while no one spoke, and Beatrice found herself enjoying the simple peace of the ride. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Birds called from the grasslands, and somewhere in the distance a coyote yipped. After about an hour, Josiah slowed his horse and waited for them to catch up. He pointed toward a line of trees marking a creek bed, water source, runs year-round, fed from mountain snowmelt. "Important to know where your water is. Is the land we are looking at near here?" Samuel asked. "About another hour north. It is tucked up against the foothills, protected from the worst of the winter winds, good access to water, some timber for building." Josiah paused, his eyes scanning the landscape with the ease of long practice. "Remote, though. Nearest neighbor is me. About 3 miles east. Town is a 2-hour ride in good weather. That does not worry us," Samuel said. "We are used to working hard and making do." Josiah nodded, then his gaze moved to Beatrice. "What about you, Miss Walsh? This is rough country for anyone, but especially for a woman on her own much of the time. Your brother will need to go to town for supplies, need to work the land. You would be alone for hours or days at a time, no one to talk to." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes. "Though I suppose the quiet might not bother you as much as it would others." Beatrice pulled out her slate board, balancing it carefully on her saddle. She wrote, "I am not afraid of solitude, and I can manage myself." Josiah read the words, and this time there was definitely a hint of a smile on his face. "I believe you can. Just want to make sure you know what you are getting into. Winter here is no joke, can snow for days straight, gets cold enough to freeze a man solid. Need to be prepared, need to be tough." She wrote, "I am tougher than I look." "That is obvious," Josiah said, and the way he said it made Beatrice's breath catch. It was not flirtation exactly, but there was warmth in his tone, respect. Anyone who has dealt with what you have and still kept that fire in their eyes is tough enough for anything. They rode on, climbing gradually now as the land rose toward the mountains. The prairie gave way to scrubland, then to scattered pines. The air grew cooler and fresher, and Beatrice could hear the sound of running water growing louder. Finally, Josiah reined in his horse at the crest of a small rise. "There," he said, pointing. Beatrice looked where he indicated and felt her heart lift. Below them, nestled in a small valley between 2 ridges, was a stretch of land that looked like something from a dream. A creek ran through the center, bordered by cottonwood trees. The land was a mix of meadow and forest, with pines climbing the slopes on either side. It was protected, private, and absolutely beautiful. "About 80 acres total," Josiah said. "Previous owner started building a cabin but had to move on before finishing. Structure is sound, just needs work. There is a small barn too, needs repair but usable." They rode down into the valley, and as they got closer Beatrice could see what he meant. The cabin was small, maybe 1 or 2 rooms, but it had solid walls and a roof that looked intact. The barn was more ramshackle, but Samuel immediately started assessing it with a practiced eye. "This is good land," Samuel said, dismounting. "Really good. The price?" Josiah named a figure that made Samuel's eyebrows rise. "That is fair." "More than fair, actually. Owner wants it sold. Wants to know someone will actually use it. Been sitting empty for a year." Josiah swung down from his horse with easy grace, then moved to help Beatrice dismount. His hands spanned her waist again, and he lifted her down as though she weighed nothing at all. For a moment she was close enough to see the exact color of his eyes, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. "Thank you," she mouthed, not trusting herself to try for even a whisper. He nodded, holding her gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then stepped back. Samuel was already exploring, walking the perimeter of the cabin and checking the structure. Josiah stayed near Beatrice, close enough that she felt protected but not so close that it seemed improper. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Beatrice pulled out her slate board. She wrote, "It is perfect. It is good land," Josiah agreed. "Hard work to make it productive, but good land. You could run some cattle, chickens for sure. Garden would do well in that southern exposure. Hunt deer in the fall, fish the creek in summer." He paused. "It is a good life if you do not mind the isolation and the work." She wrote, "I have never minded work, and isolation might be peaceful." "It can be," Josiah said, "though it can also be lonely. Important to know the difference before committing to it." Beatrice looked up at him, this big, quiet man who had chosen mountain solitude over town life. She wrote, "Is that why you live in the mountains? Because you prefer isolation?" Josiah's expression shifted, something guarded entering his eyes. "Partly. Mostly I found that people and I do not always mix well. Too much noise, too much meaningless talk. Mountains do not demand anything except respect and awareness. That suits me," she wrote. "But you still come to town sometimes, need supplies. And I guess part of me still needs some connection, even if it is just Porter complaining about the weather and me buying salt." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You understand that, I think. Needing connection but being wary of it." Beatrice nodded slowly. He did understand. This rough mountain man who barely spoke to anyone understood her better after 2 days than most people did after knowing her for years. Samuel returned, his face flushed with excitement. "I want to make an offer. This is exactly what we need. Can you arrange the sale, Thompson?" "Can. Owner is in Cheyenne, but I know how to reach him. Could have papers ready in a week or so if he agrees to your price." "Good. Let us do it." Samuel looked at Beatrice. "What do you think? Is this home?" Beatrice looked around at the valley, at the creek running clear and cold, at the mountains rising protective on either side. She thought about making a life here, about the work and the peace and the possibility of starting fresh. She wrote on her slate, "Yes, this is home." The ride back to town felt different. There was excitement now, anticipation. Samuel talked about his plans, about how he would repair the barn first, then work on expanding the cabin before winter. Josiah listened and occasionally offered advice, his knowledge of mountain living obviously extensive. As they neared town, Josiah slowed his horse again. "I should mention my place is about 3 miles east of your property. If you ever need help, anything at all, you can reach me. I will show you the trail before I head back up the mountain." "That is generous," Samuel said. "We appreciate it. Out here, neighbors help each other, not always a lot of us, so we stick together." Josiah's gaze moved to Beatrice. "Especially important for you. Miss Walsh, if your brother is gone and you need anything, you come find me. Do not hesitate." She nodded, feeling that warmth in her chest again. The idea of knowing he was nearby, of having him as a neighbor, made this wild, beautiful place seem a little less daunting. They returned the horses to Porter and spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Josiah handled the communication with the landowner while Samuel secured temporary work in town to earn extra money while they waited for the sale to complete. Beatrice helped Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, her mind full of plans and possibilities. That evening, Josiah found them at the boarding house. He stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space, looking slightly awkward in the domestic setting. "Sale is arranged," he said. "Owner accepted your offer. Papers will be ready in 5 days. You can move in after that." Samuel whooped with joy, actually hugging Beatrice in his excitement. "Thank you, Thompson. Truly. Just doing what needed doing." Josiah shifted his weight, his gaze finding Beatrice. "I will be heading back to the mountain tomorrow. Got traps to check. But I will come back down in 5 days to help you move your things out there if you want." "We would appreciate that," Samuel said. "Good. Meet me at Porter's at dawn on the 6th day. He nodded to both of them, but his eyes lingered on Beatrice. "Miss Walsh." She smiled at him, letting her eyes show her gratitude, her happiness, and maybe a little of the feeling growing in her heart. Something in his expression softened, just for a moment. Then he was gone, disappearing into the evening shadows like the mountain man he was. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. Samuel worked at the livery stable, earning money and learning what he could about raising livestock in Wyoming. Beatrice sewed and mended their clothes, preparing for the rough life ahead. She also spent time in Porter's store, learning what supplies they would need and how to communicate with the storekeeper efficiently. Porter turned out to be patient and kind. He learned to wait while she wrote on her slate board, and he started anticipating her needs before she even had to ask. "You got a good head on your shoulders," he told her one afternoon. "Going to do just fine out there." Margaret Harding came into the store once while Beatrice was there. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line when she saw her, but she said nothing, clearly remembering Josiah's sharp words. Beatrice held her head high, refusing to be cowed. On the morning of the 6th day, Beatrice woke before dawn with butterflies in her stomach. She dressed carefully in her practical green dress, braided her hair, and met Samuel downstairs. They loaded their belongings onto a wagon Samuel had purchased with his earnings, everything they owned packed into trunks and crates. Josiah was waiting at Porter's, looking exactly as he had before, solid and strong and somehow reassuring. He helped load the last of their supplies, his strength making easy work of crates that Samuel struggled with. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Samuel confirmed. The journey to their new home took longer with the loaded wagon, but Beatrice did not mind. She rode in the back, watching the landscape change as they climbed toward the mountains. When the valley finally came into view, she felt tears prick her eyes. This was really happening. They had a home. Josiah and Samuel unloaded the wagon, while Beatrice explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was rough but sound, with one main room that served as kitchen and living space, and a smaller room that could be a bedroom. The floor was packed earth, the windows small and without glass, but it was shelter and it was theirs. She found a broom and started sweeping, making the space habitable. By afternoon, they had arranged their few pieces of furniture and stocked the shelves with supplies. It was beginning to feel like home. Josiah stayed through the day, helping with heavier tasks. He repaired a loose board in the barn, showed Samuel where the best fishing spots on the creek were, and pointed out game trails in the forest. Beatrice watched him move through the landscape with absolute confidence, every action economical and purposeful. As the sun began to set, Josiah prepared to leave. "I will come by in a few days, make sure you are settling in. If you need me before that, follow the creek east about 3 miles. My cabin is set back from the water, but you will see the smoke from my fire." "Thank you," Samuel said, shaking his hand, "for everything." Josiah nodded, then looked at Beatrice. She stepped forward, her slate board ready. She wrote, "Thank you for seeing me, not just looking at what I cannot do, but seeing who I am." Josiah read the words slowly, and when he looked up, his gray-green eyes were intense. "That is not hard to do, Miss Walsh. You shine pretty bright to anyone paying attention." Her breath caught. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. There was respect, certainly, but there was something else too. Something that made her pulse race and her skin feel warm. "Call me Beatrice," she mouthed carefully, knowing he would understand. "Beatrice," he repeated, and her name in his deep voice sent shivers through her. "Then you should call me Josiah. Out here we do not stand on formality much." She nodded, smiling. He mounted his horse, the gray gelding shifting under his weight. 6 days, he said. "I will check on you in 6 days." Then he rode off into the gathering dusk, and Beatrice watched until he disappeared into the trees. "He is a good man," Samuel said quietly beside her. "Yes," Beatrice mouthed, not needing her slate board, "he is." The first days in their new home were filled with constant work. Samuel spent his time repairing the barn and building a chicken coop, while Beatrice focused on making the cabin livable. She sewed curtains from spare fabric, fashioned a table from rough boards, and planted a late-season garden that might yield some vegetables before the first frost. The isolation was profound but not frightening. The sound of the creek became a constant backdrop, soothing and steady. Birds called from the forest, and at night coyotes sang to the stars. Beatrice found herself waking with the sun and falling asleep with true tiredness in her bones, the kind that came from good, honest work. On the 6th day, she woke with anticipation humming through her veins. Josiah had said he would come, and she believed him. She took extra care with her appearance, changing her dress twice before settling on a deep blue one that she knew brought out the color of her eyes. Samuel noticed and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Josiah arrived mid-morning, riding up the valley with a pack mule trailing behind his horse. Beatrice's heart actually skipped when she saw him, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if that could calm it. He dismounted with that same easy grace, and Beatrice noticed he had shaved, his jaw clean and strong. His hair was still tied back, and his shirt was clean. He looked like he had taken some care with his appearance too, and that realization sent warmth through her entire body. "Morning," he said, "brought some things." He began unpacking the mule, pulling out parcels wrapped in cloth and paper. "Fresh venison, some fish I smoked yesterday, garden vegetables from last year that I preserved, extra blankets for winter." "You did not need to do all this," Samuel protested, though his eyes lit up at the sight of the meat. "You are my neighbors now. This is what neighbors do." Josiah's gaze found Beatrice. "Morning, Beatrice." The way he said her name with that slight roughness in his voice made her feel things she had only read about in books. She smiled at him, letting her eyes speak for her. "How are you settling in?" he asked, directing the question to her specifically. She pulled out her slate board. "Very well. The peace here is beautiful." "It is," Josiah agreed. "Takes some getting used to if you are from more populated areas, but once it gets in your blood, cities feel wrong." Samuel had started unloading the supplies, carrying them into the cabin. Josiah fell into step beside Beatrice as she followed. "Show me what you have done with the place," he said. Beatrice led him through the cabin, showing him the improvements she had made. He examined everything with genuine interest, complimenting her curtains and the clever way she had arranged the limited space. "You have a good eye," he said. "This place looks more like a home already than mine has in 5 years," she wrote. "Maybe you need a woman's touch." The words were out before she thought about how they might sound. Beatrice felt her face heat, but Josiah just looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with something electric. Beatrice could not look away from his eyes, and she saw something in them that made her knees weak. Interest, attraction, want. Samuel's return broke the spell. "Thompson, can you show me the best way to reinforce the barn roof? I am worried about snow load this winter." "Sure," Josiah said, his voice slightly rough. He looked at Beatrice one more time, then followed Samuel outside. Beatrice leaned against the wall, pressing her cool hands to her hot cheeks. What was happening to her? She had known this man for barely more than a week, had spent perhaps a handful of hours in his presence, and yet she felt drawn to him in ways she had never experienced before. It was not just his appearance, though she could not deny that his strength and rugged masculinity affected her deeply. It was the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her. He did not treat her silence as a limitation or a burden. He treated her as an equal, as someone worthy of respect and attention. More than that, he saw her, really saw her, past the surface to the person underneath. Outside, she could hear the men talking as they worked on the barn. Josiah's deep voice mixing with Samuel's higher one, discussing measurements and techniques. She went about her tasks, preparing a meal from the supplies Josiah had brought, but her mind was occupied with thoughts of him. They ate together at midday, sitting outside on rough benches Samuel had built. The venison was delicious, seasoned with herbs Beatrice did not recognize. "From the mountains," Josiah explained when she pointed at them questioningly. "Wild herbs that grow at higher elevation. I can show you where to find them if you want. Good for preserving meat, too." She nodded eagerly, and he smiled. It was the first full smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face completely. He went from rough and intimidating to handsome and almost boyish despite his age and his scars. "I can take you up the mountain sometime," he offered. "Show you the good foraging spots, the places to find medicinal plants. Knowledge your grandmother probably had but gets lost when families move west." She wrote, "I would like that very much." "Good. Next time I come down, weather permitting, we will make a day of it." After lunch, Josiah showed them how to smoke meat properly, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to read the weather in the mountains. His knowledge seemed endless, accumulated from years of self-sufficient living. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" Samuel asked. 5 years up here specifically, 10 years in wilderness areas before that. Grew up in Virginia, but after the war I could not settle back into town life. Needed space, needed quiet. The war, Samuel repeated. You fought? I did. Artillery unit. Saw too much, did too much. When it was over, I just started walking west and did not stop until I found a place that felt right. Josiah's expression had gone distant, haunted. Mountains saved my life in a way, gave me purpose again, gave me peace. Beatrice's heart ached for him. She understood trauma, understood how life could break a person, and how hard it was to put the pieces back together. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand on his arm. Josiah looked down at her small hand on his scarred forearm, then up at her face. The haunted look faded, replaced by something warmer. Thank you, he said softly, and she knew he understood what she was saying without words. The afternoon passed too quickly. Before Beatrice was ready, the sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains, and Josiah was preparing to leave. 6 more days, he said, then I will come back. Take Beatrice up the mountain like I promised. If that is all right with you, Samuel. Of course, she would be in good hands. She would be, Josiah agreed seriously. I will guard her with my life. The intensity in his voice, the way he looked at her when he said it, made Beatrice's chest feel tight. She pulled out her slate board with shaking hands. She wrote, I trust you completely. Josiah read the words, and something in his expression shifted. That is a gift, he said quietly. I do not take it lightly. He mounted his horse, gathered the mule's lead, and with one last long look at Beatrice, rode east toward his mountain home. Samuel watched him go, then turned to Beatrice with a knowing look. You are falling for him. Beatrice wanted to deny it, but she had never been able to lie to her brother. She nodded slowly. He seems to be falling for you too, Samuel said gently. I see the way he looks at you, like you are something precious and rare, she wrote. Is it crazy? We barely know each other, maybe. Or maybe sometimes you just know. Mother always said she knew she would marry father the first day they met. Said something in her heart just recognized him. Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. Josiah's is a good man, rough and maybe damaged, but good. If something develops between you two, you have my blessing. Beatrice leaned into her brother, grateful for his support, but inside she was terrified. What if Josiah did not feel the same way? What if his kindness was just his nature, not specific interest in her? What if he could never see past her limitation to consider her as a potential partner? The next 6 days dragged by with agonizing slowness. Beatrice threw herself into work, improving the cabin, tending the garden, learning the rhythms of mountain life. But every night she lay awake thinking about gray-green eyes and a deep voice that spoke her name like a prayer. She wondered about his life, about what he did in his mountain cabin. Did he think about her? Did he count the days until he would see her again the way she did? On the 6th morning, she woke before dawn and immediately began preparing. She dressed in her most practical clothes for hiking, braided her hair in a crown around her head to keep it secure, and packed a small bag with water and her slate board. Samuel was grinning at her over breakfast. You look like a kid on Christmas morning. She made a face at him but could not deny it. She felt excited in a way she had not experienced in years, maybe ever. Josiah arrived exactly when he said he would, as the sun was clearing the eastern horizon. This time he brought a smaller horse, a bay mare with gentle eyes. For you, he told Beatrice. She is steady and sure-footed, perfect for mountain trails. Beatrice approached the mare carefully, letting the horse sniff her hand. The mare nickered softly, and Beatrice felt immediate affection for the sweet animal. I will take good care of your sister, Josiah told Samuel. We will be back before dark. I trust you, Samuel said simply. Josiah helped Beatrice mount, his hands careful and respectful, though she felt the warmth of them even through her skirt. Then he swung onto his gray gelding with that powerful grace she found so captivating. Ready for an adventure? He asked, his eyes bright with something that looked like excitement. She nodded enthusiastically, and they rode out. The trail led east along the creek, then climbed into the foothills. As they gained elevation, the vegetation changed. Pine trees grew taller and more dense, and the air became noticeably cooler and sweeter. Beatrice breathed deeply, feeling something in her soul expand with the beauty around her. Josiah rode slightly ahead, but he kept looking back to make sure she was comfortable. After about an hour, He stopped at a small clearing where a spring bubbled up from the rocks. "Good place to rest the horses," he said, dismounting. He helped her down, and this time his hands lingered just slightly longer at her waist. "How are you doing?" She pulled out her slateboard. "This is magnificent. I have never seen anything so beautiful." "It gets better," Josiah promised. "Wait until we reach the upper meadows." They let the horses drink from the spring, and Josiah pulled out some dried fruit he had brought for a snack. They sat on sun-warmed rocks, and Beatrice felt more content than she could remember being. "Can I ask you something personal?" Josiah said after a while. She nodded, giving him permission. "Your voice, you said it was an accident when you were younger. Does it cause you pain?" She appreciated that he asked directly rather than tiptoeing around the subject. She wrote, "Not physical pain anymore, sometimes frustration. Mostly I have adapted, but I miss singing. I used to love to sing." Josiah read the words carefully. "I bet you had a beautiful voice." She smiled sadly and wrote, "My mother said I did. Now I will never know for sure. Must have been hard, losing that and then losing your parents too." She nodded, feeling the familiar ache of grief. She wrote, "But Samuel is wonderful. And now we have this new start. I am grateful." "You have a remarkable attitude," Josiah said. "A lot of people would be bitter after what you have been through," she wrote. "Bitterness only hurts yourself. I learned that early." They sat in companionable silence for a while, and Beatrice was struck by how comfortable it was. With Josiah, silence was not awkward or something to fill. It just was peaceful and natural. Finally, he stood and offered his hand to help her up. His hand was warm and calloused, strong enough to crush but holding hers with surprising gentleness. They rode higher into the mountains, and true to his word, the scenery became even more spectacular. They emerged into an alpine meadow carpeted with late summer wildflowers in shades of purple, yellow, and white. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. "Oh," Beatrice breathed, the sound escaping without conscious thought. Josiah heard it and turned in his saddle. "Beautiful, is it not? This is my favorite place in the world." She nodded, too overcome with emotion to even reach for her slateboard. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, from the sheer overwhelming beauty of it all. Josiah dismounted and came to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, she realized she was actually crying. She covered her face, embarrassed. "Hey," Josiah said gently, his large hands carefully pulling hers away from her face. "Nothing wrong with tears. This place deserves them." She looked up at him through watery eyes and saw such understanding in his face that more tears came. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and gently wiped her cheeks. "When I first came here," he said quietly, "I sat right over there and cried for about an hour. First time I had cried since before the war. Something about beauty this pure. It breaks down the walls we build around ourselves." Beatrice nodded, understanding completely. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let me show you what I brought you up here to see." He led her across the meadow to a spot where several plants grew, their leaves distinctive and silvery. "This is sage, but not the common kind. This is sacred sage, used by the Shoshone people who lived here before us. Good for healing, good for purifying. You take just what you need, and you thank the plant for its gift." He showed her how to harvest respectfully, how to identify other useful plants. Mountain thyme, yarrow for wounds, wild roses, whose hips could be brewed into tea rich with vitamins for winter health. Beatrice absorbed every word, every instruction. But more than the knowledge, she treasured the experience of learning from him, of being up here in this sacred space with this man who was becoming increasingly important to her. They spent hours in the meadow. Josiah spread a blanket and they ate the lunch he had packed, simple food that tasted like ambrosia in that setting. They lay back in the grass and watched clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Josiah told her stories about the mountains, about the animals he had encountered, about the rhythms of seasons at high elevation, and Beatrice felt herself falling deeper and deeper in love with him. It was not just attraction, though she could not deny the way her body responded to his presence. It was something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits. He understood isolation and trauma and healing. He understood the peace of nature and the value of silence. He saw her not as damaged but as different, and he appreciated that difference. The afternoon was growing late when Josiah finally sat up with obvious reluctance. "We should start back. I promised Samuel I would have you home before dark." Beatrice nodded, though she wanted to stay in this perfect place forever. They packed up and mounted their horses for the ride down. As they descended, the shadows were growing long, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. The temperature dropped, and Beatrice shivered slightly. Without a word, Josiah stopped his horse and pulled off the jacket he wore. He rode close to her and draped it around her shoulders. It was huge on her, heavy with his warmth and smelling of pine and smoke and something distinctly him. "Thank you," she mouthed. "Cannot have you catching cold," he said. But the way he looked at her suggested his concern went deeper than simple neighborly care. They reached the valley just as the last light was fading from the sky. Samuel was outside, clearly watching for them, and he relaxed visibly when they came into sight. "How was it?" he called. "Perfect," Josiah answered, helping Beatrice dismount. "Your sister is a natural mountain woman. She took to the high country like she was born to it." Samuel smiled. She always did love open spaces and wild places. Josiah gathered the reins of the bay mare. "I will take her back with me, but feel free to borrow her any time you want to ride, Beatrice. She seems to like you." Beatrice realized she was still wearing his jacket. She started to take it off, but he stopped her. "Keep it for now. I will get it next time I come down." His eyes met hers, and she saw clear intention there. He was creating a reason to come back, claiming connection. Her heart soared. She pulled out her slate board. "Thank you for today. It was one of the best days of my life." Josiah read the words, and his expression softened into something tender. "Mine too," he said simply. "I will come back in a few days. Maybe take you fishing this time if you are interested." She nodded eagerly. "Good. I will bring proper gear for you." He looked like he wanted to say more, but with Samuel standing right there, he just nodded to both of them. "Good night." He rode off into the darkness, and Beatrice stood watching until she could no longer see even the faint outline of him against the starlit sky. That night, lying in her small bed wrapped in Josiah's jacket because she could not bear to take it off yet, Beatrice let herself fully acknowledge what she felt. She was in love with Josiah Thompson, completely, utterly, irreversibly in love. The question was, did he feel the same way? And if he did, what would they do about it? The next days fell into a pattern that was both wonderful and agonizing. Every 3 or 4 days, Josiah would ride down from his mountain cabin with some excuse, some reason for the visit. He brought fresh game, or wanted to show Samuel a better way to build something, or needed to borrow a tool he clearly did not actually need. But everyone knew the real reason was Beatrice. He would find ways to spend time with her, to talk to her through her slate board, to teach her more about mountain living. He took her fishing as promised, and she learned she had a natural talent for it, much to his delight. He showed her how to track animals, how to read weather signs, how to find her way using the stars, and with each visit, the connection between them grew stronger. It was in the way he looked at her, his gray-green eyes following her movements with obvious admiration. It was in the way he found excuses to touch her, helping her over rough ground, steadying her when she climbed, his hands lingering just a bit longer than strictly necessary. It was in the way he spoke to her, his voice going softer and warmer when they were alone. Beatrice felt it too, this growing pull between them. She found herself thinking about him constantly, counting the hours until his next visit. She took extra care with her appearance on days she thought he might come. She treasured every moment in his presence, memorizing the details of his face, the sound of his laugh, the way his hands moved when he worked. Samuel noticed, of course. "He is courting you," he said one evening after Josiah had left, "in his own mountain man way, but he is definitely courting you." Beatrice felt her face heat. She wrote, "Do you think so? I know so, and I think you should let him know you are interested too. The man looks like a kicked puppy every time he has to leave you. Could it be true? Did Josiah, this strong, independent man who needed no one, actually need her?" The next time he visited, Beatrice decided to be bold. They had gone for a walk along the creek, ostensibly so he could show her the best place to set fishing lines. But when they reached a quiet spot where the water pooled deep and clear, Beatrice stopped and pulled out her slate board. She wrote, her hand shaking slightly, "I need to tell you something." Josiah read the words and immediately gave her his full attention. "What is it?" She hesitated, fear and hope warring in her chest. Then she thought about what he had said that first day in the general store, about her saying more with her eyes than others did with words. She could do this. She could communicate what she felt. She wrote, "I think about you constantly. When you are not here, I am counting the hours until I see you again. I have never felt this way about anyone." Josiah read the words slowly, his expression unreadable. Beatrice's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. What if she had misread everything? What if he did not feel the same way? What if she had just ruined this precious friendship? Then Josiah lifted his eyes to hers, and what she saw there made her breath stop. Heat, want, tenderness, and something that looked like relief. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough, "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. I did not want to rush you, did not want to presume. You are so young, so new to this place. I thought maybe I was just a novelty, the first person who treated you decent." She shook her head vigorously and wrote, "No, it is not that, it is you, everything about you." "I am not an easy man," Josiah said seriously. "I am set in my ways. Scarred by things I saw and did in the war, I live rough and isolated. I am not smooth or polished or educated. I do not have much to offer except my hands and my heart." Beatrice reached up and pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the words. Then she wrote, "Your hands and your heart are everything I want." Josiah's eyes blazed. He caught her hand, the one that had touched his lips, and pressed his own lips to her palm. The kiss sent electricity through her entire body. "I am 32 years old," he said against her palm. "You are 20. That is a significant difference." She pulled her hand back and wrote firmly, "I do not care about that. I am a grown woman. I know my own mind and heart." "Your brother," Josiah started, but Beatrice was already writing, "Samuel approves. He told me so." Josiah let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You have all the answers today," she wrote. "I have one question, though. What is that?" She held up the board. "Do you love me?" Josiah looked at her for a long moment, his eyes intense and serious. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Beatrice Walsh. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in Porter's store, not letting that vicious woman break your spirit. I love your strength, your grace, your kindness. I love the way you see the world, the way you adapt and overcome. I love how you communicate with your whole body, your eyes, your expressions. You do not need words to be the most eloquent person I have ever met." Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face now, but they were happy tears. She set down her slate board because she needed both hands free. She reached up and cupped his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palms, the strength of his jaw. Josiah covered her hands with his own. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Beatrice nodded, her heart feeling like it might burst from her chest. Josiah lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she stretched up to meet him. When their lips finally touched, it was like lightning and sunshine combined. His lips were gentle despite his rough appearance, careful and reverent. He kissed her like she was something precious and fragile, even though she had shown him repeatedly that she was neither. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Josiah rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably court properly for months. But I am not a patient man, and I know what I want. I want you as my wife, my partner, my home." Beatrice pulled back enough to see his face to make sure he meant it. What she saw left no doubt. This man, this strong, independent mountain man who needed no one, needed her, wanted her, loved her. She nodded vigorously, smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes?" Josiah asked, needing to hear it confirmed. She nodded again, then grabbed her slate board with shaking hands. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Josiah let out a whoop that startled birds from the nearby trees. He picked Beatrice up and spun her around, her feet leaving the ground, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Beatrice felt herself melt into his strength. She had never been kissed before, had never really thought she would be, and it was more wonderful than anything she had imagined. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, both grinning like fools. Samuel took one look at them and started laughing. "Finally," he said. "I was beginning to think I was going to have to lock you two in a room together." "We are getting married," Josiah announced, his arm around Beatrice's waist, holding her close. "I figured when, soon as we can arrange it. Is there a preacher in Lusk?" "Circuit preacher comes through once a month. He was just here last week, though, so it will be 3 more weeks until he is back." Josiah looked at Beatrice. "Can you wait 3 weeks?" She wrote on her slate, "I have waited 20 years for you. 3 more weeks is nothing." The next 3 weeks were a flurry of preparation. Beatrice sewed a dress for the wedding, using fabric Samuel bought in town and lace Josiah purchased from a catalog. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned, pale cream cotton with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Josiah spent the time preparing his cabin for a wife. He built proper furniture, installed glass windows he had ordered months ago but never bothered to install, whitewashed the interior walls. He wanted everything to be perfect for when he brought Beatrice home. Because it was decided that after the wedding, Beatrice would live with Josiah in his mountain cabin. Samuel would stay on the valley property, which was better suited for farming and raising livestock anyway. They would still be neighbors, close enough to help each other but giving the newlyweds privacy. The wedding day arrived with perfect autumn weather. The leaves had started to turn, painting the mountains in gold and red and orange. The circuit preacher, a kind old man named Reverend Michaels, agreed to perform the ceremony at the valley property so everyone could attend. Everyone turned out to be Samuel Porter and Mrs. Chen from town, and a few other neighbors who had become friendly with Samuel. Margaret Harding was notably absent, which pleased everyone. Beatrice wore her new dress with wildflowers in her hair that Josiah had picked for her that morning. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his hair and beard, looking almost civilized except for the raw power that radiated from him. When Beatrice walked out of the cabin to where everyone waited by the creek, Josiah's face transformed with wonder. He watched her approach as though she were an angel descending from heaven. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Michaels spoke about love and commitment and partnership. When he asked for vows, Josiah spoke his clearly and firmly. "I vow to love you, protect you, and honor you all the days of my life. I vow to be your voice when you need one and to listen to your silence when you do not. I vow to build a life with you that honors both our strengths and accepts our weaknesses. You are my home, Beatrice, and I will cherish that gift forever." There was not a dry eye in the gathering. Then it was Beatrice's turn. She had prepared for this, had written her vows on a special page that Samuel had helped her decorate. Samuel read them aloud for her, his voice thick with emotion. "I vow to love you with every breath I take and every beat of my heart. I vow to be your partner in all things, to stand beside you in hardship and joy. I vow to build a home with you in these wild mountains, to fill it with love and laughter, even when my voice cannot fill it with sound. You saw me when others looked past me, heard me when others heard only silence. You are my heart, Josiah, and I give it to you freely and completely." Josiah's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Do you have rings?" Reverend Michaels asked. Josiah pulled out 2 simple gold bands. He had carved the inside of each with symbols, mountains and stars for Beatrice's, and sage leaves for his own. He slipped Beatrice's ring onto her finger, his hand steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Samuel handed Beatrice the ring for Josiah, and she slipped it onto his finger, this tangible symbol that this powerful man was choosing to bind himself to her. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Josiah, you may kiss your bride." Josiah cupped Beatrice's face in his large hands and kissed her gently, reverently, sealing the vows they had just made. The small gathering cheered and applauded. They celebrated with a simple meal that everyone had contributed to. Mrs. Chen had made a cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious. Porter gave them a set of proper dishes as a wedding gift. Samuel gave them a quilt their mother had made, tears running down his face as he handed it over. She would have loved to see this day, he said. She would have loved Josiah. As the sun began to set, Josiah helped Beatrice mount the bay mare he had brought for her. They were riding to his cabin, to their cabin now, to begin their married life. "Take care of her," Samuel said, gripping Josiah's hand. "With my life," Josiah promised. "She is my whole world now." They rode through the twilight, following trails Beatrice had come to know over the past weeks. The forest was full of evening sounds, peaceful and welcoming. Beatrice felt no fear, only excitement and anticipation. Josiah's cabin appeared through the trees, and Beatrice gasped. He had hung lanterns outside, creating a warm glow that made the place look magical. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the new glass door she could see the fire burning on the hearth. Josiah dismounted and helped her down, but instead of letting her walk, he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the door. "Tradition," he said with a smile. "Got to carry you over the threshold." He carried her inside, and Beatrice looked around in wonder. The cabin had been completely transformed. The rough bachelor space was now a home, with comfortable furniture, colorful blankets, and small touches that made it warm and welcoming. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and the table was set for two with the new dishes Porter had given them. "I wanted it to be perfect for you," Josiah said, setting her down carefully. "I know it is not fancy, but—" Beatrice pressed her fingers to his lips again, stopping the words. Then she pulled out her slateboard and wrote, "It is perfect because it is ours." Josiah pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I still cannot believe you are really mine, that you chose me." She pulled back and wrote, "I still cannot believe you chose me." "That was never in question," Josiah said seriously. "From the moment I saw you, I knew. My heart knew. I just had to wait for my head to catch up." They spent their first evening as a married couple talking by the fire, Beatrice writing on her slateboard and Josiah responding. They talked about their pasts, their hopes for the future, their dreams for the life they would build together. "I want children someday," Josiah said tentatively. "If you do, I know bringing a child into this rough life is not easy, but I think we could do it. I think we could raise strong, good kids out here." Beatrice nodded enthusiastically and wrote, "I want that too, a family, with you." Later, Josiah showed her to the bedroom, where he had built a beautiful bed frame from pine and laid out quilts and furs to make it warm and comfortable. He had placed wildflowers on the pillow, a sweet gesture that made Beatrice's heart overflow. "I will be patient," Josiah said, his voice rough. "We have all the time in the world. There is no rush for anything you are not ready for." But Beatrice was ready. She had waited her whole life for this, for him, for this feeling of being completely seen and loved. She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. Then she began unbuttoning her dress, her eyes never leaving his. Josiah's breath caught. "Beatrice," she smiled at him, letting her eyes communicate everything she could not say aloud. Love, desire, trust, certainty. Josiah stepped forward and helped her with the buttons, his large fingers surprisingly dexterous with the small fasteners. When the dress fell to the floor, he looked at her with such reverence that she felt like a queen. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered, inside and out. Their wedding night was everything Beatrice had hoped for and more. Josiah was gentle and patient, showing her with his actions what words could never fully convey. And when they finally came together, it felt like two halves becoming whole, like coming home after a long journey. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Beatrice felt complete in a way she never had before. She might not be able to speak, but she could communicate her love in countless other ways. And Josiah, her mountain man, understood every single one. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Beatrice learned the rhythms of Josiah's life, the constant tasks required for mountain living. He taught her to tan hides, to preserve meat, to make candles from rendered fat. She taught him the value of small domestic comforts, adding touches to the cabin that made it truly a home. They developed their own language, a combination of her slateboard, gestures, and expressions that let them communicate as easily as any speaking couple. Josiah became incredibly attuned to her needs and wants, often anticipating them before she even had to ask, and their physical connection only deepened. Josiah loved her with a passion that left her breathless, and she discovered that her body had its own language, one that needed no words at all. Winter came early to the mountains that year. By November, snow had already begun to fall, and by December they were thoroughly snowed in. But Beatrice did not mind. The cabin was warm and well stocked with supplies, and spending days and weeks alone with her husband was not a hardship but a gift. They would lie in bed until late morning, wrapped in quilts and each other, then spend lazy afternoons doing small tasks and talking by the fire. Josiah read to her from the few books he owned, and she sewed clothes for both of them. In the evenings they played cards or just sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall outside their windows. It was during one of these quiet evenings in January that Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come. She had been so caught up in the newness of marriage and the isolation of winter that she had not noticed immediately. But now, counting back, she realized she had missed 2 cycles. Her hand went to her stomach, wondering, could it be possible? She watched Josiah for a while, this strong man who had become her entire world, and imagined him holding a baby, their baby. The image filled her with warmth. That night, after they had made love and were lying tangled together, Beatrice reached for her slate board, which she kept beside the bed. She wrote, "I think I might be with child." Josiah's entire body went still. Then he lifted himself up on one elbow to look at her, his eyes wide. "Truly?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. She nodded, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," Josiah breathed, "our baby." His eyes filled with tears, and he bent to kiss her stomach gently. "A family. We are going to be a family." The joy on his face erased any anxiety Beatrice might have felt. Yes, bringing a child into this remote life would be challenging. Yes, there were risks. But with Josiah beside her, she felt capable of anything. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. As the snow melted and the passes opened, Josiah rode down to town to consult with the doctor there, getting advice on what they would need for the birth. Mrs. Chen, who had attended several births, agreed to come stay with them when Beatrice's time grew near. Samuel visited regularly, thrilled at the prospect of becoming an uncle. The valley property was flourishing under his care, and he talked about maybe finding a wife of his own someday. "Seeing you two so happy makes me want that too," he admitted one afternoon. "Someone to build a life with, someone who understands me." Summer came warm and beautiful. Beatrice's belly swelled with their growing child, and Josiah was endlessly fascinated by it. He would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, talking to their unborn child about the mountains and the life they would have. "Boy or girl does not matter to me," he said one evening, "as long as the baby is healthy and you are safe." Beatrice smiled and wrote, "I think it is a boy. He kicks like a mule." Josiah laughed. "A son. I like the sound of that. James, maybe, after my father?" Beatrice nodded. "James Thompson." It was a strong name for what she suspected would be a strong boy, if the constant kicking was any indication. Mrs. Chen arrived in late August, just days before Beatrice went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, as first births often are, but Mrs. Chen's experience and Josiah's steady presence got her through it. When the baby finally came, letting out a strong, healthy wail that filled the cabin, Beatrice cried tears of joy and relief. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the baby in clean cloths, big and healthy like his father. She placed the baby in Beatrice's arms, and Beatrice looked down at her son in wonder. He had dark hair like Josiah and a red face scrunched up in outrage at being born. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Josiah knelt beside the bed, looking at his wife and son with an expression of complete awe. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers instinctively curled around his father's much larger finger. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." The weeks after James's birth were exhausting but magical. Beatrice had never imagined such love was possible, this fierce protective adoration for this tiny human they had created. And watching Josiah with their son made her fall even more deeply in love with her husband. For such a large, strong man, Josiah was incredibly gentle with the baby. He would hold James for hours, walking him around the cabin when he fussed, singing to him in his deep, rumbling voice. He changed diapers without complaint and got up for middle-of-the-night feedings, bringing the baby to Beatrice, then staying awake to keep her company while she nursed. "I never thought I would have this," Josiah admitted one night, watching James nurse. "A family, a home, someone to love and who loves me back. After the war, I thought I was too broken for this kind of happiness." Beatrice reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. She understood. She had felt the same way, believing her inability to speak made her unworthy of love and family. But they had found each other, two broken people who fit together perfectly, and now they had created this beautiful life. As James grew, he proved to be a happy, curious child. He had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's smile. He was walking by 10 months, getting into everything, and Beatrice had to constantly watch him to keep him out of trouble. Josiah built a small wooden fence around a section of the yard so James could play outside safely. He carved toys for his son, taught him to identify animal tracks, showed him how to be gentle with the chickens they now kept. When James was a year and a half old, Beatrice realized she was pregnant again. She told Josiah by presenting him with a tiny knitted cap she had been working on in secret. He looked at the cap, then at her growing smile, and whooped with joy. "Another baby? Truly?" She nodded, and he picked her up and spun her around just like he had that day by the creek when they had declared their love. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Beatrice knew to what expect. And the second birth, while still challenging, went faster. This time they were blessed with a daughter, born on a cold March morning with snow falling gently outside. "She looks just like you," Josiah said, tears running down his face as he looked at their daughter. Beautiful like her mother. They named her Rebecca, after Beatrice's mother. She had dark curls and blue eyes that would eventually turn brown like Beatrice's. From the beginning, she was a quieter baby than James had been, more observant, watching everything with serious eyes. Life in the mountain cabin was full and rich. Samuel visited regularly, and eventually he did find a wife, a quiet widow named Margaret, who came west with her own tragic story. They married and built a life on the Valla property, and suddenly the Walsh Thompson family had doubled. The children grew healthy and strong. James became a skilled tracker like his father, able to move through the forest with surprising stealth for a child. Rebecca was fascinated by plants and herbs, learning from her mother which ones were useful and which were dangerous, and the love between Beatrice and Josiah only deepened with time. They learned to communicate in looks and touches, in small gestures that said more than words ever could. Every night, no matter how tired they were, they would sit together after the children were asleep and just be together. Sometimes talking through her slate board, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. One evening, when James was 5 and Rebecca was 3, and Beatrice was growing round with their third child, Josiah pulled out an old journal. "I want to show you something," he said. "I started writing this the day I met you, though I did not really understand why at the time." He opened the journal and showed her pages filled with his rough handwriting. Entries about seeing her for the first time, about how she had not let Margaret's cruelty break her spirit, about teaching her to fish and taking her to the high meadow, about falling in love and being terrified she would not feel the same way. "I wrote down everything," Josiah said, "because I wanted to remember every moment of us, of how we became us." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears as she read his words, seeing their love story through his eyes. Then she pulled out something she had been saving, a similar journal she had kept, though hers was filled with drawings rather than words, sketches of him, of their children, of their life together. "We both wanted to remember," Josiah said softly, looking at her drawings, "because what we have is worth remembering." Their third child was another boy, born in August just like James had been. They named him Samuel after Beatrice's brother, and he grew to be the wildest of their children, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. The years passed quickly, marked by seasons and growth and constant work. The children learned to read and write, taught by their parents with books ordered from back east. They learned to ride and hunt and fish, to respect the mountains and understand the rhythms of nature. James grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet strength and capability. Rebecca remained observant and thoughtful, with her mother's expressive eyes and her father's steady presence. Samuel was energy and laughter, keeping everyone on their toes. And through it all, Beatrice and Josiah remained each other's foundation. People would sometimes come through from town, or travelers passing through would stop at their remote cabin, and they were always amazed by the couple's relationship. "How do you communicate so well?" one traveler asked once. "She cannot speak, and yet you two seem to understand each other better than any couple I have known." "Words are just one way of talking," Josiah replied, pulling Beatrice close against his side. "My wife talks with her eyes, her hands, her whole body. I just learned to listen with more than my ears." One autumn day, when Beatrice was in her early 30s and they had been married for more than a decade, a familiar figure rode up to their cabin. It was Porter from town, looking older but still spry. "Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," he greeted them. "Got some news from back east I thought you would want to hear. There is a doctor in Boston doing experimental work with throat injuries. Seems he has had some success restoring speech to people with conditions like yours, Mrs. Thompson." Beatrice felt her heart skip. The possibility of speaking again, something she had long ago given up on. Josiah looked at her carefully. "What do you think? Want to look into it?" Beatrice considered. Part of her was curious, hopeful even, but she looked around at her life, at her husband and children, at the home they had built. Would being able to speak change any of this? Would it make her love deeper or her life richer? She pulled out her slate board and wrote, "I already have everything I need. My family understands me perfectly. If I could speak, it would be wonderful. But if I never do, I am completely content. My silence has not limited my life at all." Josiah read her words and smiled. That full, genuine smile that still made her heart race after all these years. "That is my wife. Wise as she is beautiful." "I will tell the doc you are not interested then," Porter said, "though if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." After he left, Josiah pulled Beatrice into his arms. "You are sure? If there is a chance to restore your voice." She pressed her fingers to his lips and shook her head. Then she wrote, "You told Margaret that I say more with my eyes than she would with her mouth in a lifetime. You were right. I have found my voice, Josiah. It just sounds different than other people's, and you hear it perfectly." "I do," Josiah agreed, kissing her thoroughly. "I always have." The children grew into young adults, strong and capable and kind. James became a skilled trapper like his father, though he eventually married a girl from town and built his own cabin halfway between his parents' mountain home and Lusk. Rebecca married a teacher who moved to Wyoming from back east, drawn by stories of the frontier, and they settled in town where Rebecca ran a successful shop selling medicinal herbs and remedies. Samuel, their wild child, surprised everyone by becoming a preacher. He said he had found his calling after a near-death experience during a bad fall while climbing. He traveled the circuit between frontier towns, bringing faith and hope to isolated families. Beatrice and Josiah were immensely proud of all their children, of the people they had become. And as they grew older and their hair turned gray, they continued to live in their mountain cabin, still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. On their 20th anniversary, Josiah took Beatrice back to the high meadow where he had brought her on their first day together. It was autumn again, and the wildflowers were gone, but the beauty was no less profound. "I brought you here the day I realized I loved you," Josiah said, holding her hand as they stood in the middle of the meadow. "I wanted to show you beauty worthy of you, though nothing could quite match it." Beatrice leaned into his side, feeling the solid strength of him, still powerful even in his 50s. "You changed my life," Josiah continued. "Before you, I was just existing, surviving. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just getting through each day." Beatrice pulled out her slate board, the same one she had carried for years, worn now with constant use. She wrote, "You saved me too. You saw me when everyone else looked past me. You loved me not despite my silence but including it. You gave me everything I never dared dream I could have." Josiah read the words and pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the autumn wind whispered through the pines around them. "We saved each other," he said against her hair, "and I would do it all over again, every moment if it led me back to you." They stood together in that meadow for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and purpose in the wilderness. They had faced hardship and loss, joy and triumph, always together, always understanding each other perfectly. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they rode back down to their cabin, to the home they had built with their own hands and filled with love. Years continued to pass, measured in seasons and grandchildren. James and his wife had 4 children, Rebecca had 3, and Samuel, despite his calling as a preacher, found a wife late in life and had 2. Beatrice and Josiah's cabin became a gathering place for the growing family, filled with noise and laughter and love. Beatrice, even as she aged, never lost the ability to communicate with just her eyes and expressions. Her grandchildren learned to read her face as easily as they learned to read books, and they never saw her silence as a limitation, but as just another interesting thing about their grandmother. "Grandma does not need to talk," James's oldest daughter said once. "She says everything that matters without words." One winter evening, when Beatrice was in her 60s, she and Josiah sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. The cabin was quiet, just the two of them, the children all grown and living their own lives. Josiah reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Despite the arthritis that was beginning to affect them both, despite the gray in their hair and the lines on their faces, the touch still sent warmth through her entire body. "Do you have any regrets?" Josiah asked quietly. "About how our life turned out?" Beatrice smiled and shook her head firmly. Then she picked up her slate board and wrote carefully, her handwriting still neat, despite her aging hands. "My only regret is that we did not meet sooner, but then again, maybe we met exactly when we were meant to. You needed time to heal from the war. I needed time to grow strong enough to face the frontier. We found each other when we were ready, and that is perfect." Josiah read the words, his eyes growing misty. 25 years married, and you still find ways to make me fall more in love with you." She wrote again, "Good, because I plan to keep doing it for another 25 years at least. I will hold you to that," Josiah said, pulling her close and kissing her tenderly. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance, listening to the wind outside their cabin. They had built a good life here, a strong life full of love and purpose. Beatrice thought back to that day in Porter's store when Margaret Harding had mocked her inability to speak. She thought about how Josiah had defended her, how he had said she communicated more with her eyes than Margaret would with her mouth in a lifetime. He had been right. She had found ways to speak volumes without words. She had raised children, built a home, supported her husband, helped her community. Her silence had never limited her because she had never let it define her. And Josiah had been the key to all of it, this rough mountain man who had looked past surface limitations to see the person underneath. He had loved her not despite her differences, but including them, appreciating them even. As the fire burned low and they prepared for bed, Beatrice took one last moment to write in her slate board, words she had written many times before but never tired of expressing. "I love you, Josiah Thompson, today, tomorrow, and forever." Josiah read the words and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "I love you too, Beatrice Thompson, my wife, my heart, my home, forever and always." They climbed into the bed Josiah had built when they first married, now worn comfortable with years of use. He pulled her close against his chest, and she listened to the steady beat of his heart, the same sound that had comforted her on their wedding night and every night since. Outside, snow began to fall softly, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside, the fire crackled gently as it died down to embers, and in their bed, wrapped in quilts in each other's arms, Beatrice and Josiah drifted off to sleep, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in this wild frontier. True love, understanding, partnership, home, not despite their differences, but because of them. Not in spite of hardship, but through it. They had proved that communication went far beyond words, that love could flourish in the most unlikely places, that two broken people could become whole together. And as the years continued to pass, as they grew old together in their mountain cabin, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the life they had built, they never forgot the lessons they had learned. That silence could be eloquent, that eyes could speak volumes, that love, real love, required not perfect people, but people perfectly committed to understanding each other. Beatrice and Josiah lived out their days in that mountain cabin, never moving to town, never leaving the wilderness they loved. They aged together gracefully, their love as strong in their 80s as it had been in their 20s. When Josiah finally passed away at 87, it was peacefully in his sleep with Beatrice beside him. She held his hand and felt his last breath, and though she could not cry out in grief, her silent tears spoke volumes. She followed him 3 months later, simply going to sleep one night and not waking up, as though her heart had decided it could not beat without him. Their children buried them together in the high meadow they had loved, marking the spot with a simple stone. On it they carved not just names and dates, but a quote that captured their parents' entire relationship. She said more with her eyes than most do with a lifetime of words. He heard every single one. Together, they spoke a language of pure love. And so their story ended where it had truly begun, in the mountains they loved, together forever, two souls who had found in each other everything they had never known they needed. The cabin remained in the family, passed down through generations, and each time a descendant visited, they felt the love that still lingered in the walls, in the worn floorboards, in the very air. Because some love stories do not end with death. Some loves are so powerful, so true, that they transcend time and mortality, becoming legend, becoming inspiration, becoming proof that real love exists. The story of Beatrice and Josiah was one of those loves, and in the mountains of Wyoming, in the wind through the pines and the rushing of mountain streams, their story continued to be told, generation after generation. A tale of a woman who could barely speak and a mountain man who heard her anyway. A tale of love that conquered limitation, of understanding that transcended words, of two people who proved that communication is about connection, not just speech. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. That love finds a way, that understanding goes deeper than words, that two people committed to truly seeing each other will always find a way to communicate what matters most. Beatrice and Josiah had lived that truth every single day of their marriage, and they left behind not just children and grandchildren, but a legacy of love that would inspire their family for generations to come. Their story became part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings. Great-great-grandchildren would ask to hear about the grandmother who could not speak, and the mountain man grandfather who loved her anyway. And each time the story was told, the lesson remained the same. Love sees, love hears, love understands, not because it is easy, but because it is willing to work, willing to listen, willing to look beyond surface limitations to the truth underneath. And so, in a small mountain cabin in Wyoming, in the hearts of everyone who knew their story, Beatrice and Josiah lived on. Proof that fairy tales can be real, that true love does exist, and that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones never spoken aloud. Their love had been a gift to each other certainly, but also to everyone who witnessed it. It showed that different did not mean less, that silence could be golden, that communication was about connection and understanding, not just the sounds that came from your mouth. The mountains that had sheltered them, that had witnessed their love story, stood eternal and unchanging. And somewhere in the wind that whispered through the pines, in the rush of mountain streams, in the peace of high meadows, the love of Beatrice and Josiah continued on, timeless and true, a testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of hearing and being heard, of loving and being loved exactly as you are. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.